Hello, everyone. Welcome to Court with Krissy. If there's a silver lining to this sad, yet very strange series of events, it is this. Little Mr. Murphy's mom can now cash in and clone. Just what she needs, another little Mr. Murphy. I hope you like it. Court with Krissy is now in session.
All right, this is Brenda Stepp versus Andrea Huntley. Chris Huntley and Freeze Drive by C and Company LLC. It's case number 2320938NZ.
Your Honor, if I may real quick, Mr. Miller, I believe, is being added to the hearing via Zoom.
Okay.
Just connecting to audio is taking a minute.
No, that's actually my client.
Oh, is it your?
Yeah,
Okay.
it says Mark.
Oh,
That's,
yep.
that's my client.
Okay. Miss Stepp, Georgia. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just waiting for her to unmute.
All right, we're here for plaintiff's motion for a default judgment against Andrea Huntley and Freeze Drive by C and Company LLC. And appearing here for the plaintiff is Mr. McGinnis, and you are Andrea Huntley, is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
All right, you can go ahead, Mr. McGinnis.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just kind of as a preliminary matter that I discussed with your clerk, first, we do have, this was initially scheduled for a settlement conference. My client, Ms. Stepp, has reached a settlement with Chris Huntley. We do have a proposed conditional dismissal signed by myself and Mr. Miller on behalf of Mr. Huntley. So what I had discussed with your clerk is potentially getting this entered. So Mr. Huntley is out of it, and then the default judgment, if granted, would be the final order.
Okay.
So I do have a proposed order if you'd like me to approach.
You may. All right, what settlement did you reach with Mr. Huntley?
The terms?
Yeah.
He agreed to pay $30,000 by January 31st. If he does not, then I believe there's it's a consent judgment in the amount of, I don't know if I put it specifically in there. Consent judgment. I don't have the settlement right in front of me, but I believe it's $44,240. Your Honor, I'd be willing to make sure that for the sake of accuracy, we'll just put it at 44,000. But I don't have the settlement right in front of me. I just have my notes from mediation.
And that 30,000, was that categorized in terms of attorney's fees, costs? Just
No, Your Honor, general
like a
damages.
number?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, I've signed that consent order of conditional dismissal. Keep that in file for entry. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. And that brings us to the default judgment motion. We wanted to get this in as soon as we could, as I know we want to keep things moving. Your Honor, the remaining defendants, Miss Huntley and the business Freeze Drive by C & Co. LLC, were defaulted on June 10th, 2024. If you recall, Your Honor, at a status conference in June, you did provide Miss Huntley with my consent as well with an additional 14 days to set aside the judgment by file an answer. She never did so. So at this point, the default has been in effect for 6 months. And so we filed this motion for default judgment, seeking a judgment in the amount of $125,905.20. That is breaking down. You can see the economic components of our claim, my client's claim, as well as the non-economic components. On page 8 to 9 of my brief, Your Honor, I did break down where exactly we get the economic components from and the basis for awarding those. I'm happy to discuss those. The obviously bigger ticket item here is the non-economic damages, the mental anguish and trauma and humiliation that my client has had to go through on this. That's extremely difficult to put into words, Your Honor, through writing. And I do have misstep here, but we'd like to, again, keep this moving as fast as possible. This is something that was an incident that was horribly traumatic for my client in a way that has gravely affected her life. And just, Your Honor, for a little bit of background for justification for a number like this, involved in this case is my client's now deceased dog, little Mr. Murphy. Little Mr. Murphy, misstep, was unable to have children due to medical reasons. Little Mr. Murphy assumed that role of a child in her life. He was her baby, he was her pride and joy, he was her everything. And so when he unfortunately passed, she couldn't bring herself to the thought of just putting him in the ground. She wanted to create a memorial of him. And that's when she started looking into the freeze drying business. The freeze drying process is basically one that creates a similar like taxidermy preservation, but in a better way of an animal's remains. You can do it with flowers, but also with animals. So she found Miss Huntley and Miss Huntley's business, Freeze Dry by C&Co. She drove all the way up here to Georgia, delivered him, and for the next 27 months, had real emotional trauma because Ms. Stepp did not complete the work as she promised. She strung my client along. She never even actually started the process. She simply took the dog, stuck him in the freezer, and my client waited 10 months. And we showed this in emails, which were exhibit 1 to my brief. Waited 10 months, started reaching out, was promised a couple more months. Said, I'll show you pictures. Ms. Stepp physically removed the dog, took pictures as if she was making progress with it, said, acknowledged that she has my client's heart. She has what's most precious to my client, that she has my client's baby, and said, I would never do anything to disrespect her client's remains. A couple months pass, my client reaches back out, no response. She begins to suffer from panic attacks, sleeplessness. She starts going to therapy. She goes a few times a month. She's missing work. This is something that is deeply emotionally draining on her. Eventually, she drives back up to Newaygo in October of 2022. That's 2 full years after delivery of the dog. Keep in mind, this was supposed to be a 10 to 12 month process. She can't get a response. She drives up here. No one's here to help her at the business. She's begging for the return of her dog. Again, is continuing to experience these emotional traumatic issues. And finally, once she goes to the media, Andrea does in fact ship her back the dog. My client receives it. The way she described it to me is, it's like almost, she has that excitement like a kid on Christmas morning. Finally, I have my baby back, and she opens it and he's unpreserved. He's leaking oils. He's rotting. He stinks. He has blood coming out of his nose. A traumatic sight for my client to have to witness that. Now she will never be able to have him preserved. She's going to have to do the exact thing that she intended to avoid by driving up here and retaining Miss Huntley in her business. And she'll never be able to get the closure that she so desperately wanted. So that's where we come from on the $100,000, Your Honor. If we need to, we can put Miss Huntley or Miss Stepp on the stand at one point, but I represent to you that this is something that has been deeply haunting and traumatic and humiliating to her. So we'd request $100,000 in both, for past and future non-economic damages between the two of them. And we also do have the economic components again spelled out in page 8 to 9 of my brief.
Right, so from reading the second amended complaint, it appears to the court from that pleading that Mr. Huntley, Chris Huntley, was the owner of the LLC and the registered agent and all of that, and Ms. Huntley was an employee of that LLC. Is that right?
There's a little bit of up in the air, and say, Your Honor. Yes, he was a registered agent. He did testify that he owned it. She operated the business, Your Honor, was in full control of its operations. So she's the one who advertised, represented, made the representation, spoke with my client, met my client at Mr. Huntley's house, and was the one who was supposed to be performing the work. Mr. Huntley testified on the record. I was just basically on the title. I didn't have anything to do with it necessarily. There was evidence that we found and uncovered that was not completely true, but in terms of operations, that did fall on Miss Huntley's shoulders.
All right, so why don't we swear Ms. Stepp in for some brief testimony. Ms. Stepp, would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes, sir.
Do you solemnly swear, oath, or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, you can go ahead, sir.
Your Honor, do you mind if I take a seat? Is that okay?
Whatever's most comfortable for you.
Thank you. Good morning, Brenda. Thank you for being here on the Zoom with us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Drew. I can't hear you.
Okay. Very briefly we want to be cognizant of the court's time, but very briefly, can you tell me just a little bit about what little Mr. Murphy meant to you?
It's a difficult thing to put briefly, but I will try. As you mentioned, I could not have children, and Mr. Murphy came to me as a rescue. I was actually just fostering him for one day before I fell in love with him and realized that he was my soul pup, and pretty much was at that moment, he and I were inseparable. And he was like the child I never had. And he went everywhere with me. He was just my joy. That's the best way to describe him for me. He brought me so much love and joy and love. I just can't hardly put that into words. And I'm sorry, it's very emotional, as you know. I can't. It's very difficult for me to talk about it because there's so much pain embedded in what has happened to me and to him. And I really would like to just show this picture just so that the judge can see what Mr. Murphy looked like. This is my little baby. He was 9 pounds, miniature dachshund. And I knew he was growing older, and I had actually started researching because I thought, my gosh, how in the world could I possibly bury him? It just wasn't an option, or cremate him. And I had been looking into the freeze dry, and I came across Andrea because of her story. I have come from a family business, and that appealed to me. I thought there might be so much more compassion and care that is put into that scenario. It is for me. And so when I first contacted her, I had spoken to another gentleman, and she persuaded me to use her. She said that she had the North Star state-of-the-art equipment, which also appealed to me. And so we started communicating, and at that time she seemed extremely compassionate, and I thought, I think this is the person I want to trust, and she had, I think, some plans coming up to do a vacation, and I knew that was critical from my first conversations and research with freeze drying of pets, that you have to immediately get them frozen in ice, and there's a specific way that you do that to get the air out and put them in the freezer. And that was maybe one of the hardest things that I did the day he died on June 23rd, 2020. I didn't have much time. I just held him for a short while, a few minutes, and then I did what I was told to do, which was wrap him in the blanket, get him into my freezer. And so he sat there until it was a good timing for Andrea and I to meet, and that's when I rented a vehicle that would accommodate me getting to Michigan and getting him, and a friend also came. And so I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on, I guess, about how
That's okay. And I'll try and lead us along here, Brenda. I appreciate you sharing. So I believe you brought him up here, and little Mr. Murphy delivered him in October of 2020 to Miss Huntley and the business at the residence of. When you drop him off with Miss Huntley, At that point in time, did you feel at peace with your decision?
I did. I had one of the reasons I wanted to take him is I couldn't trust the idea of just putting him as cargo. He wasn't cargo to me. He was my baby. And so I couldn't fly him and ship him that way. And I wanted to meet her. I wanted to meet her in person. I wanted to see what the place in which he was going to be. And I felt at peace when we drove up because it was a really pretty setting. And it was on a little lake and the trees were really pretty. And I thought, she invited me in with the baby, and I was able to talk to her more about the business and her family, and I held her little cat who happened to be a little hairless cat, and it just seemed I felt right about it. I felt good about it, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done to leave him. But on the other hand, I thought, you have to trust, Brenda. You have to trust, and it's gonna be okay. And it was very with heavy heart that I left, but I put my faith in the situation.
Okay. And Brenda, do you believe that you made clear to Andrea, Miss Huntley, how important this was to you?
Yes, I took her a little heart magnet and I said, I want you to know you're holding my heart. And she said, she gave me all the assurances that she understood, and she also understood my story of not having had natural children, and that this was my baby, that he was my baby, and that was just the whole event, of course, of losing him was devastating, but this was a hope to be able to ease that grief. And she certainly did know. We had many emails and conversations before I arrived, and the day of, she was still very, seemingly kind. And like I said, it required a lot of trust on my part. And that's so devastating.
Yeah. And how long did Miss Huntley tell you that the freeze drying process would take approximately?
She told me that in my case, it's, by weight, and he was not a big doggy, so she said that it would probably be about 10 months. And that was what she put on my receipt. I paid her in cash in full. And I happen to say, if there's any delays or anything like that, what would be the outside, because approximate 10 months. And she said it could, if it is something, it could be a couple of months more. So I said a total of like a year. And she said, yes, she said he'll be finished and you can come back. She also realized, because I told her, I was very clear that I wanted to come back. I made sure he would still be there at that location, not moved, nothing would be changed about that, and that I would come back and pick him up in person. I did not want him shipped, and she said that's not a problem. She knew how I felt deeply about all of that, Drew.
And so we can see on the invoice, Exhibit 7 attached to the motion, balance completion due as anticipated August 4th, 2021, which is about that 10 months. Do you reach out to Miss Huntley in August?
I thought I waited till 12 months had passed before, because I didn't want to, I wanted to trust her and trust what she said. And then when I did reach out to her to, ascertain what was going on, I, hadn't heard a word from her. So this, I believe, was, after the original promise date, if you will, by a couple of months passed. And she said that she had some personal things happen and going on, and that she was a little behind and she needed a few more months. And I said, okay, I was very worried. And she said, well, I would never do anything to harm your baby, and you don't have to worry. And I believe that's where she did the what I call the fake picture, trying to act like she was working on him.
Okay. And so she does respond to you. Do you give it a couple more months? How much longer do you wait until you reach out again, if you can recall?
Yes, that was in I believe that was in October, and so I didn't start reaching out to her again. Once again, I was trying to give her the respect of things happen. You need a little more time. It was so important to me. I was willing to keep trusting. And I think it was in February. So I started sending her emails saying, can you please let me know what's going on? I'm getting very alarmed, very concerned. And so it was in February, I think it was the end of February, she essentially sent me an email and said, pretty much bug off, leave me alone. And I absolutely fell apart. I just absolutely destroyed me. And at that point, all of the true anguish and torture began for me, and that's about the time I sought counseling, because I couldn't function. I still
Okay. So
can't function.
I apologize for interrupting you.
That's okay.
By sought counseling, did you go to therapy?
Yes,
Okay.
Dr. Gallo.
And was that therapy related, and would you say attributable to the mental anguish that you were experiencing as a result of the Miss Huntley's actions?
Yes, it was directly related. I'd never been to him before. I'd never been to counseling before. And he was specifically trying to help me with processing my grief. And it was such unresolved grief. And I was having both physical and mental issues going on because of it. I was having a lot of anxiety, very emotional. I mean, I'm still emotional, but this is sort of a small little bit of what it was at that time.
By physical symptoms, what are you referring to?
Well, I had something that he diagnosed, which is I never even knew it existed, but it's basically broken heart syndrome, and it's sort of like a PSTD type syndrome, in that anything can trigger it. I could see somebody loving with their dog, and it would just, I would fall apart. It was constant and ongoing, and I had literally had heart pains, had heart like it felt, never had heart condition. It was just directly related to my broken heart, and I had insomnia, ruthless insomnia, nightmares about, I was very humiliated over what was being done to me and my baby. And it was very difficult to just do anything, to carry on.
And
I'm
how
still
often?
having a hard time.
Absolutely. How often would you say at that
Mr.
point?
McGinnis, would you like to cover the wage loss?
Yes, Your Honor. I was just, Your Honor, or Brenda, did you miss any work as a result of the mental anguish that you're experiencing?
I did, yes.
Does 18 days sound about accurate for the amount of time you missed?
It's probably more, but yes, I think that's about, what I thought was full days. There were other times I couldn't stay, but I think, that sounds about right.
Okay. And I believe we attached as exhibit 8 to the brief, Post-tax, that's about $5,358.96. Does that sound accurate?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I'll try and keep moving. So at some point in time,
10 o'clock, so.
Okay. At some point in time, you drive up here, Brenda, you're unable to retrieve him. Eventually he gets shipped back to you. Can you just briefly describe what that experience was like for when you opened him?
Well, it was horrible. He was all wet and oily, and he had blood coming out of his little nose, and the stench that I'll never forget. And it was the most hurtful thing I've ever had anybody do to me. She knew what she was doing, and if I could have just been allowed to come get him. But she knew that she put him in that cooler with no dry ice, and she knew that was essential. And it just, I can't give you words, Drew. I'm sorry. I can't give you words. There are no words to describe what I felt and what it makes me feel like to even tell about it right now. It's my baby. She destroyed my baby. The idea of me being able to have him preserved is gone.
Thank you for sharing, Brenda. Your Honor, out of respect for your time, we'll leave it at that.
All right, Ms. Huntley, do you have any questions for Ms. Stepp?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any other witnesses that you wish to call, Mr. McGinnis?
No, Your Honor.
Are there any witnesses that you wish to call, Ms. Huntley?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Given the testimony and the documentation that was presented, the court is going to enter a judgment against Andrea Huntley and Freeze Dried by C and Company LLC in the amount of $125,905.20. And Mr. McGinnis, you can prepare a judgment to that effect, breaking out in terms of the costs and so forth. That does include reasonable attorney fees. It does include the costs. It includes economic damages as well as non-economic damages as well.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will have that submitted by the end of the day.
All right, thank you. That's all for today.
Judge Stringstead, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to do this by Zoom.
You're welcome, ma'am.